The nervous system is developing pretty quickly. In fact, the brain is up here at the head. The eyes and the ears are just beginning to develop at 4 weeks. And the spinal cord is growing so fast that it's growing faster than the body. The spinal cord kind of gets out ahead of the body, sort of looks like the baby has a tail there. I'll tell you, the evolutionists have fun with that. They say, see, there you go. The baby has a tail. This is reflecting or perhaps, well, it can't reflect our ape ancestry because apes don't have tails, but presumably our monkey ancestry. And then they look at the little folds in the neck here, and they say, gill slits. Have you heard about gill slits in school, perhaps? My children were taught when they were in junior high that the baby actually uses those gills to breathe in the amniotic fluid of the mother's womb. Well, nothing could be further from the truth. This is not a tail, and these are not gills. But down through the years, there have been some pretty well-known obstetricians that have bought into the idea that this really represents something other than human. That this is maybe a fish stage with the gills, and this is maybe a monkey stage with the tail. And the limbs, you notice, the forelimbs and the legs down here are just little paddles, so that's all consistent with the fish stage. In fact, there was a famous obstetrician by the name of Dr. Spock. Back in the 50s, no mother would ever try to raise a child without reading Dr. Spock. It was a paperback book. And Dr. Spock said this. He said, each child as he develops is retracing the whole history of mankind, physically and spiritually, step by step. A baby starts off in the womb as a single tiny cell, just the way the first living thing appeared in the ocean. Weeks later, as he lies in the amniotic fluid of the womb, he has gills like a fish. This has led a lot of people to defend evolution, or I'm sorry, to defend abortion as you're really killing some other kind of an animal. You're not killing a human. You're maybe killing a fish or a monkey or something of that type. Well, it turns out that those structures that we see, they're technically known as the pharyngeal apparatus or the pharyngeal folds or pouches. These are never gills. They're not a gill in the embryo or fetus. And they go on to develop tissues in life and organs, and none of them have anything to do with respiration. What is formed? Well, the ear forms from some of these arches, the first two. The eardrum forms from the first one. The thyroid gland develops from these little arches. The external auditory canal, that hole that goes in the side of your head where your ear is, develops from that. The eustachian tubes that balance the pressure in each side of your eardrum develop from these little folds. The tongue, the parathyroid, the thymus. So in other words, there's an embryological fate for these folds that has nothing to do with respiration or being a gill. But this idea that embryos go through their evolutionary history was popularized in Germany back in the late 1800s by a fellow by the name of Ernst Haeckel. And Ernst Haeckel compared the embryos, or claimed to compare the embryos of a pig, a rabbit, a human, and a dog are all here, and he showed how similar they were. And he argued that, see, we go through our evolutionary history. Well, it turned out that Ernst Haeckel, who popularized evolution in Germany, he was a contemporary of Darwin, falsified his data. He picked different stages to compare. He took liberties to change the size of things. And yet this idea of recapitulation has been perpetuated ever since the middle 1800s. Again and again, scientific papers have been published showing that this is an entirely wrong view of embryological development. Here was a paper published in Science, for example, in 1997. And in this paper, they say, Haeckel's embryos, fraud, rediscovered. It is quite simply a fraud. Here it says generations of biology students may have been misled by a famous set of drawings of embryos published 123 years ago by the German biologist Ernst Haeckel. Studies were done to show that if you really compare these embryos at the same stage of development and at the proper size, the fish, the salamander, the turtle, the chicken, the rabbit, the human, the dog, lamprey, what have you, are all distinctly different and unique for each creature. In fact, embryos do not go through the stages of their evolutionary history, embryonic or adult. Ehrlich and Holm, in their book, The Process of Evolution, said of this whole recapitulation explanation for embryos, this interpretation of embryological sequences will not stand close examination. Its shortcomings have been almost universally pointed out by modern authors. But the idea still has a prominent place in biological mythology. Would you like to see some of that biological mythology? Check your biology textbooks. For example, here we have a biology textbook from Holt, Reinhardt, and Winston, and they show the fish and the tortoise and the chicken and the rabbit. Notice once again the similarities, which are not real. They're imagined. McGraw-Hill, the same thing in their biology textbook. And if you read that statement down at the bottom, they say that these embryos have tails and gills or gill slits. As the embryo develops, the gill will be replaced by lungs. The tail will disappear in the human embryo. None of these things are true. There is no tail to disappear. The gills will not be replaced by lungs because the gills aren't gills. They have nothing to do with the lungs. They develop into other structures. And finally, they ask this probing question: what bone in your body is the remnant of your tail? Why, that, of course, would be the tailbone, wouldn't it? There it is right there. You ever fall in your tailbone? Well, I'll tell you, you fall in your tailbone, there's three positions you can't stand to be in. One is sitting down, another standing, and the other's laying down. It hurts because there are many muscles that attach there. You see, this is not a tail at all. This little bone serves as an anchoring point for many muscles of the body that are called the pelvic diaphragm. The pelvic diaphragm is like a bowl that sits down here. Bladder, uterus, sigmoid colon, all set on top of that structure. If we didn't have the pelvic diaphragm, something rather disgusting would happen. The first time we went like that, whoopee, things would just kind of go right on through. So this is an extraordinarily important structure. There are at least 12 different muscles that attach to the tailbone, or the coccyx, and yet biology textbooks still say it's useless.